With that, I'd like to pass it off to Carlo. Carlo, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to your talk.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, everyone. Let me just get my screen share going here. And yeah, I hope everyone's able to see that now with my blue dot kind of wiggling around.
Looking great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Victoria Natural History Society and BC Nature and Heidi for letting me talk today. So my name is Carlo Acuña. I go by he, him, and I am one of the ocean campaigners for the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, the BC chapter. I'm coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations in what is now Vancouver, or it is called Vancouver. Indigenous peoples have been stewarding lands and waters here in BC, in their territories here in BC, and managing their resources for thousands of years. And today I'll talk to you a little bit about how some First Nations have been stewarding them around your area in the southern on the Gulf Islands and southern Vancouver Island. So let me see if I can move this. Oops. There we go. So CPAWS stands for the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, and we are the BC chapter. We work to ensure our parks are protected, our parks and protected areas are managed and protected to safeguard the nature within them. And so we are a national charity or national organization with chapters across the country, 13 of them, in almost every territory and province in Canada, as well as a national office in Ottawa. And so we are the BC chapter, and we advocate for parks and protected areas for BC, and then the marine for BC, land and freshwater, and then for marine protected areas in the Pacific Ocean. Not only do protected areas help wildlife and nature, but also the people and communities that are part of nature and depend on these places, so that they can continue to thrive and ensure future generations do the same. So yeah, so this is a pub in your kind of neck of the woods. This is the southern Strait of Georgia. So around the Gulf Islands, yeah, so around the Gulf Islands, kind of in between Nanaimo and in Victoria, that part of the Salish Sea is what Parks Canada calls the southern Strait of Georgia. Jacques Cousteau, the famous ocean explorer, visited about 50 years ago, I think around 1970 or so. And back then, he called for this area's protection because of the unique biodiversity that this place has. There's really, no place quite like it. Um, the overall kind of like south coast of British Columbia is home to about 3 million people, and millions of people visit it each year. It's an amazing place where people live, work, and play. It provides us with amazing economic and recreational opportunities, and pretty comfortable weather. Although it's dark and kind of raining right now, we don't deal with a lot of the snow that the rest of the country has. So yes, we enjoy quite a high quality of life here, and a lot of that is due to what nature comes from what nature gives us. All right. So the Southern Strait of Georgia, the Hat place this has been home to and stewarded by indigenous communities for or since time immemorial. And they've been stewarding it for thousands of years. And this map just shows shows the First Nations that are on the south, that are on the coast of southern Vancouver Island, as well as the Gulf Island. So there are 11 in total, and these are the nations that are working with Parks Canada to create a marine protected area here, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But first, let's talk about some of the wildlife that's here. So we call this place, the southern state of Georgia, the home of the orcas. And that's because this area overlaps with southern resident killer whale habitat. So critical habitat are areas where scientists have discovered that this wildlife needs to hunt, or need for hunting and raising their young and resting and recreating. So yeah, this map on the left, yeah, on your left, all those hashed areas are southern resident killer whale habitat. And as you can see, a big part of it is where the Gulf Islands and the southern state of Georgia, southern state of Georgia are. But it's not just the home of the southern residents. It's also home to but 3,000 species of wildlife. So yes, I said so we have the killer whales. We have two species, or not two species, sorry, two populations of killer whales here. The southern residents, which eat the Chinook, which mainly eat Chinook salmon, as well as the big transient killer whales. And they feed on marine mammals such as seals and sea lions. We also have Pacific herring, which this gull is eating here. They are a very important forage fish because they feed an abundance because our abundance feeds a whole bunch of different marine life, from salmon to whales to seals and, of course, birds. We also have salmon here, actually all 5 species of Pacific salmon in Canada, the Chinook, the sockeye, coho, chum, and pink, and as well as the closely related steelhead and cutthroat trout. There's also rockfish. There are about 27 species of rockfish that are around the Salish Sea, and they range from a whole bunch of colors, like the orange you see in this picture, but they can also be red, pink, brown, yellow. They are really, really cool. Some of them are like the ultimate homebodies. The researchers have found the same kind of tagged fish year after year at the exact same spot. So they don't seem to move around, or some of them don't seem to move around a lot. And some of them also can live to be 100 years old, which is really, really cool. But they are a very slow growing species. So they don't breed until they're about 20. And some of them also don't have a very few young, so they're vulnerable to overfishing. We also have harbor seals, the most common marine mammal in the Salish Sea. In 1970-ish, I think, they were protected from hunting. And finally, their population has rebounded to healthy numbers. And that's kind of a reason why we often see a lot more bigs or transient killer whales now, because this is their food, and they are eating on the abundance of, or they are feeding on the abundance of seals here. We also have kelp forests. They are, sorry, oh, there we go. We also have, yeah, kelp forests, one of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. They provide food and shelter for fish, invertebrates, and mammals, as well as glass sponge reefs. An ecosystem almost found exclusively in BC. So these reefs, which the glass sponge reefs are that kind of weird yellow sponge looking thing with all the holes in it. So unlike soft sea sponges, which most people are familiar with, these sponges, their skeletons are made of silica, the same material that glass is made of. And like coral reefs in the tropics, these reefs are highly biodiverse. They provide homes for lots of animals, such as salmon, spot prawns, rockfish, and sharks. And they are super rare, as I said, only in BC. And they are also super fragile as well. So skeletons are made out of silica, same stuff's made of same stuff glass is made out of. And so when you touch them, they feel like a thick potato chip, and so they can easily crumble. And unfortunately, they are threatened by bottom contact fishing, such as bottom trawling and shrimp trapping. So we are working to protect them. Oh, and the last animal that we have there, I didn't talk about it. We are home to the world's biggest octopus, the Pacific giant octopus. Stretching out, this thing can be as big as your garage, or as a garage. And if you've seen some videos of people hauling traps with a giant octopus trying to get in there, that is really, really cool. Seeing some of these things. Whoops. Yeah. So yeah, while we do have an amazing diversity of wildlife, unfortunately, not all is well in the Salish Sea. The biggest thing that most people know about are the southern resident killer whales, the most endangered marine mammal in Canada. There's only 72 of them left. And yeah, they are threatened by lack of access or feeding opportunities for their favorite Chinook salmon. They also have lots of toxins and toxins in their body that come from the unfortunate pollution that we dump into the water, and as well all the noise that comes from boats and ships that there are a lot of in this area disrupts their hunting. There's also we're also the whole or This area is also the home for the last open herring fishery in BC. It's right now kind of on the brink of collapse. It's been decreasing slowly for years. And First Nation chiefs just recently, I think about last week or 2 weeks ago, called to stop the fishery and give it a chance to restore itself. Salmon populations have also dwindled to a fraction of their historical numbers, and not only have their numbers decreased, but also the size. Their size has decreased. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then, of course, we have habitat loss as well. So kelp forests, as well as seagrass, which I did not talk about before. Seagrass is grass that grows underneath the ocean, so kind of like meadows in mountains or on land. They provide food, shelter, and nurseries for a whole bunch of marine life, and they're also vital for fighting climate change. Because this grass is perennial, it doesn't die off. It doesn't die off every year, and so it is storing all the carbon that it absorbs through photosynthesis on the seafloor. And unfortunately, we have lost a lot of seagrass in the southern Strait of Georgia over the years. Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this before, but these are the big threats. Are three of the big threats in the southern state of Georgia. There has been historical overfishing. So while most fisheries now are more responsibly managed, the southern state of Georgia is still reeling from over 100 years of historical overfishing and mismanagement. And yeah, as I said before, not just the numbers there, but the sizes of salmon have grown much smaller because we have taken the largest salmon out of the ecosystem. And unfortunately, yeah, those ones haven't been able to reproduce more large salmon. As well as there's just less food available in the ecosystem than there was before. Um, there's also habitat loss and degradation. So there's been about 150 or so years of rapid coastal development for the millions of people now living in the region there, and that has led to a loss of important habitats such as eelgrass and kelp forests, and one of the biggest ones is herring spawn areas, areas where herring lay their eggs. there actually used to be a lot of herring spawning in the southern Strait of Georgia, and now the main spots for spawning are now more north toward Nanaimo. And then there is shipping. Yeah, as I said before, the noise from those big ships does pose a threat to the killer whales, but not just killer whales, but also all marine life. Just big noise has been found to affect salmon as well. And with the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, as well as the planned expansion of the Roberts Banks terminal, shipping is only going to increase over the next few years. And so this has yeah, you might have noticed already in your area that a lot more ships are coming here, especially oil tankers. This will only increase with more freighters coming in with Robert Banks. And a lot of the people in the area have told me that there has been an increased use of anchorages in the southern Gulf Islands. So this is where ships that are waiting to get into the port of Vancouver have to stay because they find there's a safe harbor there. But all that noise, as well as the light that shines from those ships, actually disturbs a bunch of wildlife. Oops. There we go. So yeah, while those are some threats, BC and Canada do have some protections for this part of the marine world. So the pink stuff that you see here, I hope you can see my blue dot, are glass sponge reefs. Those are protected by the government does not, or Fisheries and Oceans Canada does not allow bottom contact fishing, such as bottom trawling or shrimp trapping in those areas. And then the purple areas here, scattered all around the Gulf Islands, those are rockfish conservation areas. And in those areas, certain kinds of fishing aren't allowed. Oops, my dot, there we go. And we also have most recently interim southern resident killer whale sanctuary zones. So Transport Canada implemented these off of Saturna and North Pender Island. So these are the red areas that you see here. In these zones, no vessels or fishing is allowed seasonally from June to December each year. And then there's also just a new one, a voluntary speed reduction zone in this area, just on the north end of Saturna there. There is there are several actual organizations that monitor these zones. One of them is Rain Coast Conservation. They monitor the North Pender Zone here for boats, whales, and they also monitor it for sound. They have a device in the water that listens to the sounds that both animals and ships are making. Saturna Island Marine Research and Education Society. They monitor the Saturna Island zone. There are also Indigenous guardians. They are from the Wasanich Nation, I believe, or the Wasanich Leadership Council. Quantolian, I believe their name is called, and they have a boat, and they also monitor those areas. And through their monitoring, we have found, or they have found, and they have told us that these interim zones aren't good enough. For one thing, they are way too small. And another thing, they're only around temporarily, like in the summer, or only 6 months of the year, while their monitoring has found that the southern resident killer whales are here all year round. And so altogether, glass sponge reef marine refuges, rockfish conservation areas, these sanctuary zones, they're all kind of like small protections, and they're kind of species specific. But because there's so much wildlife here, and to be more holistic, larger protections are needed. And that brings us to marine protected areas. So marine protected areas are one tool in a toolbox to help reduce and remove threats to nature and wildlife. So they are an area-based management tool. So that means like they don't what do you call it? They're not targeted for a specific species, but rather an area. So they are defined regions in that are legally protected and managed for long-term conservation of nature. Oh, there we go. So they protect marine life and habitats by managing and regulating human activities. So in some marine protected areas, there are places where there are certain kinds of fishing that aren't allowed. And in some areas, there is no, what do you call it, development allowed, or there's no ocean industry allowed, things like that. And by taking out some of those very harmful human activities, marine protected areas create a refuge for nature to recover, adapt, and thrive well into the future. And all MPAs are different. So there is no one size fits all. MPAs vary in size, permitted activities, and goals. So some marine protected areas protect a certain species, and some marine protected areas protect a certain biodiverse site, and yeah, a biodiverse site. And there are other ones as well. Some MPAs, especially the ones from Parks Canada, actually protect cultural sites as well. And while individual MPAs are great, together they are much better. So when MPAs are kind of grouped closely together, we call them an MPA network, and they can supercharge the benefits better than one individual site can do so alone. However, MPAs are only really effective when they are strongly managed or strongly protected, well managed, financed for the long term, and properly enforced. And that is something that Canada still needs to work on. So while we do have many protected areas or many marine protected areas, we are still advocating to the government to better manage them. So one of those new better management practices is that we got Canada to do is their new MPA protection standard. So before last year, 2023, all MPAs were very different, had different regulations, and there was no kind of standard that all the MPAs met. So some were really bad and allowed a lot of human activity, while some were really good. And so they decided that there should be some set standard that all MPAs adhere to, and they decided that these big four activities: oil and gas extraction, seabed mining, dumping of waste from ships, and bottom trawl fishing are not allowed in any new MPAs. And so earlier this year, in the summer, the newest MPA that was made after this protection standard was announced, THT, or Tangwan Hachplikak Sea Geese, which is a deep sea marine protected area way off the west coast of Vancouver Island, that protects seamounts and hydrothermal vents. It was the first marine protected area to fully implement this protection standard. Older MPAs will hopefully eventually get these protections, but they will have to they will be implemented through the management plans, which are redone about every 10 years or so. So we're hoping with enough pressure, we can get those done in the next round of management plan refreshes. Oops, there we go. And yeah, so First Nations involvement is also a key thing in marine protected area creation and management. So for millennia, the well-being of indigenous people has been linked to the health of the ocean. Nations have been and continue to be a bridge part of the ecosystems on the coast. Their people have an inherent connection to the ocean as well as a responsibility to steward it. And so in 2004, when Parks Canada was originally planning a marine protected area in the Southern Gulf Islands, they consulted local communities and stakeholders such as conservation groups like us, as well as recreation groups and industry groups as well. However, First Nations were not involved in meaningful discussions at that time. And so there was a pause following consultations in 2013 because of that. And so the 11 local First Nations, whose map I shared before, and whose territories now overlap kind of that region, are now discussing with Parks Canada the feasibility for a marine protected area here. And the marine protected area that Parks Canada does or manages are called National Marine Conservation Areas or National Marine Conservation Area Reserves, NMCARs. The vision and stewardship of those First Nations who share those waters has to be at the heart of plans to protect them. A protected area here must end up with co-governance, which is a nation-to-nation relationship of at least equal power sharing between Indigenous and Canadian governments, ideally both grounded in Canadian and Indigenous laws. So yeah, as I said before, the nations are currently working on feasibility. There is nothing really to share yet because Parks Canada and the nations are in the process of nation-to-nation talks. They haven't shared anything with us yet, but there will be hopefully soon public engagement in the near future. And that's when Parks Canada and the nations will let us know their plans, and us as stakeholders will be able to input our voices and our ideas for a marine protected area here. So even though I can't tell you exactly what this place will look like yet, what I can do is talk about how Parks Canada has managed NMCARs before locally here. And so I will talk about that. So, what is a National Marine Conservation Area Reserve? So NMCARs or NMCAs, they are marine protected areas created by and managed by Parks Canada. But not just Parks Canada, they also aim for co-governance with Indigenous nations, as well as collaboration with local communities and other government departments. So even though Parks Canada is a federal agency of the government, the provincial government will also have a part to play in this marine protected area. So their goal is to protect and conserve representative marine areas for the benefit, education, and enjoyment of the people of Canada and the world. And so Parks Canada has this map of where they divided the coast into special regions, and they want an MPA in each one of those kind of unique regions of the coast here. And one of those regions was the Salish Sea, and they have chosen the southern Strait of Georgia to be an MPA within within that region. And it's not just for nature protection. They also want to provide for the benefit and enjoyment of Canadians and people around the world. So one thing Parks Canada does is that they do promote tourism to these marine protected areas, not only to protect nature, but to show off to people in Canada and around the world the beauty or the natural beauty that we have in BC or in Canada. Yeah, so as I said, NMCAs offer an array of ecological, cultural, and social economic benefits. So yeah, that is one, tourism. It was one of the social and economic benefits, but I did talk about the cultural one. So Parks Canada also has a mandate to protect cultural sites as well. So special sites that have been home to or that are the places of special events or places that are special to our culture. And here they are partnering with the First Nations to figure out what spots in the Southern Strait of Georgia are culturally important to them so that they can be protected for the long term. And one thing that Parks Canada has been doing is that they have been working with local First Nations on clam gardens. These gardens that are on the coast where they especially there were the nations for thousands of years have specially managed them so that they can grow a lot more clams than what usually than what naturally would occur. And yeah, hopefully those clam gardens can be part of new MPA here. And so I've been talking about NMCAs and NMCARs as the same kind of like one and the same, and they pretty much are one and the same, both managed and created by Parks Canada. The only difference is that the R in the end stands for reserve, and that is that kind of denotes that the region that the MPA is being placed in is subject to one or more Indigenous land claims. And as there are, and that's kind of what covers most of BC, as unfortunately there weren't a lot of treaties here when British Columbia was established, and so First Nations still have rights, still have land claims and rights to the waters here. And yeah, so one thing, as I kind of alluded to before, is Parks Canada hasn't always managed parks in Canada in a way that respects Indigenous people. And Parks Canada, as well as CPAWS has actually been part of that too, where we have been advocating for parks that have not been inclusive of Indigenous people. Oops, sorry. So protected areas have kind of been created to the detriment of some Indigenous people by fostering disconnection between Indigenous peoples and their territories. And so there are places there are some parks in Canada where they were created and the Indigenous people living in those regions are actually kicked out of their homes in the parks and told to relocate somewhere else. And the lands that they used to gather food and medicine, they were also lost access to those. And Parks Canada is now kind of going through a rethink of how they want to engage with nations. And CPAWS is kind of doing that as well, trying to do it in a more inclusive way. And so they have started, or not started, but they have implemented now this new Indigenous stewardship policy. And so this new policy recognizes Indigenous stewardship is critical for successful conservation in their parks. It's indigenous indigenous stewardship sustains much more diversity than what I guess federal or other kind of protections have been able to offer. There was a study at UBC that found that indigenous management lands were much more biodiverse than parks created by nations. They also offer rich opportunities for connection, learning, and understanding. First Nations cultures are deeply connected to the land and water, so including the ocean. And by allowing their stewardship activities within those areas, they have a lot to teach us. And so part of this new stewardship policy is speaking with First Nations first about protected areas there. So before Parks Canada kind of implemented a whole bunch of rules and regulations without the input of First Nations people. And so they are kind of redoing their feasibility studies right now, where nations are discussed are the first people discussed with, and the only people that discussed with at the first stage. And that's why us stakeholders like conservation groups are not yet in those discussions. We will be soon, but just not at this point. So one example of an NMCAR that Parks Canada has done, and actually a really good example, is Guayhanes National Park Reserve, National Marine Conservation Area Reserve, and Haida Heritage Site. This was established in 2028, and it is Canada's first NMCAR underneath the Canada NMCA Act. Which allowed Parks Canada to create marine protected areas. And so Guayhanes is at the southern tip of Haida Gwaii, and it protects the waters around there. And this marine protected area is really cool because it has co-governance with the Haida First Nation. So it is managed by what they call the Archipelago Management Board. So there are 6 members on that board. There are 3 members from the Council of the Haida Nation, and then 3 members from the Government of Canada, 2 from Parks Canada, and 1 from Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And Fisheries and Oceans Canada is there because of jurisdiction purposes. Whenever rules and regulations are in place for that prohibit fishing in an area, Fisheries and Oceans Canada has to be involved. And what the Haida Nation has done with this MPA is that they have kind of melded in or implemented a bunch of their indigenous laws into the management of the MPA. And indigenous laws, I found, are quite different than I guess our kind of Western colonial laws. Our Western laws kind of say things like you're allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do that. And First Nations laws are kind of cooler. They do this thing where they kind of tell you how you're supposed to carry yourself or how you're supposed to think and act in a very much respectful way. And so Haida Nation has implemented these values or principles of respect, responsibility, interconnectedness, balance, seeking wise counsel, and giving and receiving into their management plan. And the other cool thing about that is those values or principles actually meld very well together with principles of ecosystem-based management. So respect is kind of like the precautionary approach. A responsibility is being inclusive and participatory to different people and groups. Interconnectedness is like interconnected management, not just focusing on one thing. Balance is like sustainable use. seeking wise counsel is like adaptive management, learning from previous observations or mistakes, and then giving and receiving is like equitable sharing, which are all part of a new way of thinking of eco-based management that looks to what do you call it? Protect and conserve wildlife, not just from a species by species point of view, but looking at how each species is kind of like internet connected with not just other wildlife, but the non-living parts of their habitat, such as water and air, as well as us, the people that share the homes with wildlife. Whoops. So one thing that NMCA's Guayhanes NMCA has, and what future NMCA's will also have, is something called zoning. So there will be at least two zones, or there has to be at least two zones within each NMCAR. One is a strict protection zone, and one is a multiple use zone. And so the strict protected zones are the dark green. Oh, here we go. The darker green ones in these regions. And the multiple use zones are the kind of khaki beige colors. And so in Guayhanes, the strict protection zones don't allow commercial and recreational fisheries or harvest, as well as no shellfish or finfish aquaculture. So none of that is allowed in those green zones here. In these beige multiple use zones, commercial and recreational fisheries are allowed. And in all zones, traditional use by First Nations is allowed. And there's also no mining or oil and gas activities. So Guayhanes kind of was a little bit ahead of the curve there by back then in 2010 not allowing uh, those two harmful kind of benthic or bottom habitat destroying activities. And so we're not quite sure what the zones will look like in what could be a future MPA in the Southern Strait of Georgia. But this is an example that we could look to see how it might happen. There's also NMCAR being proposed for the central coast of Canada, or BC, sorry. So if you don't know where this is the Central Coast. So in between the northern end of Vancouver Island, which is this little piece of land right here, and then the Alaskan border, which is right around up here somewhere, and Haida Gwaii is just around this area here. And the Central Coast First Nations are working with Parks Canada on an MCR there. They are further ahead on this process because they've had about 20 years of marine use planning that's been going on there. And so they have actually just, or not just, but in the spring of this year, they had their first round of public consultation where the nations and Parks Canada released a boundary or a proposed outer boundary for what this NMCR would be, and allowed the public to provide feedback to that area or to that plan. And this was all done online through a website where people had to type in some of their thoughts, as well as there was a survey. So Parks Canada can get kind of numbers or data on how supportive people are about an NMCAR here. And so again, this could happen with the Southern Strait of Georgia NMCR. This similar process could happen where once the nations and Parks Canada have agreed to feasibility, they could do a process like this where they allow the public to provide their feedback. So, this southern state of Georgia, as I said before, is a special place, and it needs protection for both people and nature to thrive. And so, while there isn't a public consultation on, on an MPA happening yet, there is that ongoing government to government work happening right now. Support is still needed. The biggest thing right now is that we're asking people to tell Canada to keep the process going. With these First Nations. Let these nations continue to do their marine use planning. There is right now an Indigenous Management Board that those 11 First Nations have formed, where elders as well as knowledgeable staff from each of the nations are doing marine use planning and finding out which places are special, need to be protected, places where there are a lot of biodiverse hotspots, or places that need to be protected so that species such as salmon and herring can restore their populations. And a lot of that is what do you call it? Informed by elders who have the knowledge and the wisdom to and the wisdom to properly figure out what needs to be done to best protect those areas. And right now, if you look at the Wasanich Leadership Council website, you can see a lot of the actions that they're doing within their nations for those marine use planning and for their work with Parks Canada to see if a marine protected area for them is feasible with Parks Canada here. So to stay in the loop, please follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter. You can take scans of those QR codes here. As well, if you miss doing that, I could also give you later on, I can share resources with a bunch of websites and links to things that I've talked about, today. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I have talked a lot, but that is my email address right there. And that is our website. So if you want to know more information about what's going on, please feel free to, send me an email or check out our website. In the hopefully near future, I will also be planning on going to the southern Strait of Georgia region. So the region around the Gulf Islands and around Saanich, the Saanich Peninsula, and hopefully meeting with conservation groups there. And so if you know of any conservation groups that want to talk about a possible marine protected area there, or you think would be able to share some really cool places or some values that should be protected, please, let me know. And that is it from me. I will stop sharing. Where is that button?
Thank you, Carlo, for talk. That's great. For anybody who would like to ask questions, you can put them in the chat and I can read them out on your behalf. Or if you want to ask them yourself, at the bottom of your page, there's this like react button. If you click on that, you can then raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. But Carlo, a couple of questions came in about basically about safe distances from orcas, and if you could speak to that, and particularly in the context of they've heard that now Washington State is going to have stricter laws than Canada is, and what distance do they need to stay away, and how is that guidelines changing, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that. And I did share the Be Whale Wise website just in case, but I feel like you can speak to it a bit better than just the picture.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
we don't do we are not, or CPAWS BC isn't like directly involved with southern resident killer whale endangered species management. So I don't have all the details on this. But yeah, as Gloria said, there is a new what do you call it, 1,000-yard distance. Boats have to stay away from southern resident killer whales. In BC, I think it's only about 200 meters now. And although we don't personally advocate for it, there are other organizations that we work with that do, such as Raincoast Conservation. They do a lot of the work monitoring southern resident killer whales here on the BC side of the border. If you don't know their work, they do a lot of drone monitoring where they have a special permit from the government to hover a drone just above these killer whales. And so they know exactly kind of like when they're being kind of like distressed. And they found out that the 200-meter zone or 200-meter distance you have to stay away from isn't enough. And so they are advocating for the much stronger regulations that Washington is or will be having. And it also not just not just it's not just good for the animals, but I think it's also good just for people as well, because having two sets of rules on the different sides of the border gets very confusing, especially with so many sailors and boaters crisscrossing the border. So if we had like, one set of rules, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I also find it interesting because the laws are different than if you're in the front to the side, which is very hard for some people to tell which direction an orca is moving in. If anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for those questions and definitely something for us all to look into. And I think that's a good starting point, but we can look to it. Yeah. And actually you mentioned the drones. There's
Mhm.
been some positive talk about drones and negative talk. Do you Gloria also followed up with can you talk a little bit about UBC using drones to capture photographs of the southern residents and also researchers in Washington State about them collecting and analyzing orca poo to analyze the condition of the southern residents? So do you know a little bit about that research, or
Yeah,
is
I
there
don't
anything you can
know.
share?
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but there is a little bit I do know, so that I can share. Yeah, before drones, what researchers had to do was pretty much get really up close to a whale and kind of poke it with an instrument to collect samples like blood or skin to see like how well they're doing. And they also used physical tags on the whales as well to identify each killer whale. That, of course, is quite intrusive. You have like a boat making noise there. You have the whales being poked, and so with drones, it's a better way for scientists to gather data. So scientists, after 50 years of studying these animals, they found out that each killer whale can be identified by the markings on their dorsal side, so just behind the dorsal fin. And so having a drone take a picture of that is just as good as having a physical tag being placed on there. As well, yeah, drones can capture the breath that the whales exhale, as well as some of the poop, if they're really lucky, that killer whales can leave behind, and that can also provide data on the well-being or the health and well-being of the animals, just as much as a blood sample can. So yeah, some drones, they can still kind of like, what do you call it? Disturb some of the animals. That's why only scientists with special permits are allowed to get close to them, and they try to do it as what do you call it? As rarely as they can, not so as not to disturb the animals. So yeah, it's not like, a perfect, it's not a what do you call it? A perfect method, but it is much better than what we used before.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that there was actually a company that was trying to film orcas that is actually being charged for getting too close. And they're using kind of the same sort of guidelines for drone. So very important, helpful tool, but again, with used the same way, respectfully, and following the guidelines that you're supposed to as well. So if you Google something that says something along the lines of like film company harass with drone, you'll find the story. I won't go into it too much. And Gloria, I see you turned on your camera. You're welcome to speak if you'd like.
Thanks for all the great information, Carlo. I learned a lot tonight. I thought I would just mention that I do know that Dr. Deborah Giles, who works out of Friday Harbor in Washington, she has this dog named Iba.
Oh, yeah, oh, yes.
Iba, the poop sniffing dog. And apparently when the southern orcas like go downstream, they follow, a certain distance behind and they scoop up the poop. Like Iba can smell the poop, and points to the poop and they pick it up. And apparently they can tell, if an orca is pregnant or if it's polluted and polluted with what, so they can tell a lot from the poop. So it's just another form of research, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what they can tell from poop. And I think the dog is even more amazing, being able to smell poop from that far away. The poop doesn't stay on the surface for a very long period of time. It does sink. So yeah, that's a pretty amazing dog.
Yeah, I can see what's in their diet, parasites, all that other crazy stuff. And yeah, it's so neat I love that so much of the research is trying to go into non-invasive kind of techniques or unobtrusive techniques these days. So that's great. Does anyone else? Go ahead, yeah.
I can also just mention that I was at a conference, not this summer, but the previous summer, in Washington State, a marine education conference, and they were really upset with BC because at that point in time, they had this 1,000-meter distance, and BC had 200, and they really gave it to us. So I'm glad to hear that now we've got this 1,000. Is it meters? Yeah, meters, right?
It's not, it's proposed. I'm not quite sure if
Oh,
Canada has
it's
actually
not. Oh,
implemented
okay.
it yet. I do know Raincoast has been advocating for it, but I'm not quite sure if the federal government agreed to it yet. I'm not quite sure.
So we really are behind then.
Yeah, we are still, yeah, behind. It is increasing to maybe I think 400 meters or something, but not the 1,000
Yeah,
that the Americans have.
that's too bad. Oh, okay.
Yeah, law in Canada is the 400 for the southern, and then they're calling it a guideline for the 1,000 meters, but it's not law yet. So
They were really mad at us.
yeah, well, there we go.
There you go. Okay.
Well, the more people that talk about it and that Carlos shares these sorts of things, I think that's good. Yeah, trying to conserve and protect our species. Glory, anything else you want to share? Does anyone else want to have any other questions? You're welcome to turn on your cameras and mics if you'd like, or you can put another one in the chat.
That was really helpful. I learned a lot about what the First Nations are doing. So that's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, the First Nations are really doing a lot of the not on the ground, but kind of on the water work here, learning and trying to gather as much information as they can. And so yeah, I hope we will be able to hear from them soon, so I can give people a better idea of what what's around this area, and how and why it should be well protected.
I might just mention too that, when I talk to kids and parents about the southern residents, it's such a kind of a depressing topic that I always try to talk about the northern residents, that they're doing really well. Their numbers are really up there, and there's the north, what is it, the Michael Big Sanctuary up there. So I mean, they have food, they have protection, they don't have lots of boats chasing them, and their numbers are actually increasing. So it's a really good contrast.
Yeah, so there is hope for the southern residents. We know what needs to be done to hopefully restore their population to healthy numbers. We just need to go out and do it.
Yeah.
So Carlos, CPAWS is what you would consider a good connector to the people, like of sharing information about these marine protected areas when they come here, or like if people want to learn more about when these areas are being proposed, should they look at the CPAWS website? Is that kind of what you'd recommend, or?
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to learn more information, yes, CPAWS, the CPAWS website is great. You can also follow us on social media as well. That's where we put out most of our up-to-date news and stuff like that. And if you also just wanted to hear more, you can always just email us as well. So I shared my email address there. And then hopefully I will be going to the region hopefully sometime early next year, speaking to some conservation groups and maybe some just local people trying to figure out what they value about the ocean, and learn, or not learn, but I'll be able to tell them in person what's going on with the process and why a marine protected area here should be supported.
All right, well, that was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much, Carlo. Thank you everyone for attending. No marine night talk in December because it will be holiday festivities times, but stay tuned for January. I believe it's going to be on fish and noise and foraging, which will be fun. So tune in then. And yeah, always feel free to check out the Victoria Natural History Society calendar. It has a lot of cool bird things in December. Like a lot of the talks are done, but there's a lot of cool birding events. So thank you all so much and happy Monday. Take care.
Thank you.